And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on this Sunday, October 26th, 2025. And for our aviation weather, to set things up for this upcoming week, it's going to be a very active week if you're along the Gulf Coast, especially into the Panhandle as we get around Tuesday and beyond. So it's just beyond the time frame of this outlook, but just as a heads up, because we have some at times very windy and wet weather for those locations. Meanwhile, to start out here on this Sunday, later morning, we have this kind of a collection of weak lows over the northern, drifting toward the central Bering that'll head southeastward across the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula as we get into later Monday and on Tuesday. The overall storm pattern is going to be setting up such that we have lows or waves of energy and moisture coming along the North Pacific, brushing the Aleutians, but also coming up from a couple of different locations out of the North Pacific into the Gulf. And this is everything just kind of converges through the Gulf region. So that's where the active weather will be, especially for this week as it progresses and into the early part of November. So for Monday morning, some IFR conditions expected far eastern Brooks Range, maybe toward Arctic Village, and then also down here along the Alcan border, including Eagle, Northway, also the British Columbia interior mountains there up where you'd find Chilkoot White Passes could see IFR conditions, as well as down here along the Yukon Delta. You have a lot of moist ground from the big storm a couple weekends ago, plus we have a front that's weakened and brought in some low-level moisture, a few light showers off of the Bering. So that area of the lower Yukon, including Bethel, could see some low cloudiness Monday morning. Also just a slight chance of a rumble of thunder, flash of lightning here along the eastern Gulf as we get just offshore there of the Panhandle and back out toward the central Bering. For Monday afternoon, still that possibility of an isolated thunder shower, flash of lightning, rumble of thunder, eastern portion of the Gulf, as well as southeast of the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. A couple of pockets of IFR maybe up above Haines, and another one out here still lingering around Bethel in that area of the lower Yukon, Kuskokwim deltas. Interior may see some MVFR conditions extending from the Copper River Basin, central Alaska range up through the upper Yukon, Yukon Flats. And for Tuesday morning, we do expect IFR conditions to be more extensive here across areas of central, east central interior, including the Yukon Flats, Fairbanks along the Alcan border. Still that pocket of IFR possible there above Haines, and perhaps an isolated flash of lightning, rumble of thunder, northeastern Gulf. As we go into Tuesday afternoon, here comes the next storm. We have a compact low that has strong winds, heavy precipitation that's going to push up into the Panhandle on Tuesday. So be aware of the fact there will likely be issues with turbulence, some heavier precipitation, high winds, all the stuff that comes with that. So this will be an area that sees active weather. That's just the beginning, because right after that system on Tuesday, another one's going to come up into the western Gulf with a front that sends a surge of moisture that slams into southeast Alaska, including the northeastern Gulf Coast Panhandle, all over again. So, and if that's not enough, there's another one coming in behind that for later in the week as we get toward Halloween. So this is going to be a very active weather pattern along the Gulf Coast, especially Panhandle back through Yakutat area. So keep that in mind. Meanwhile, the interior just gradually getting colder. We might see at times a stronger northeast-north flow along the west coast. So here's what pass conditions are like on Monday. Anaktuvik Pass, MVFR becoming VFR. So we'll have some cloudiness around. I think Atigun will probably hold on to MVFR conditions, as Atigun Pass is one of those passes. It's a little stubborn to improve. Lake Clark Merrill, VFR here Monday, as will Rainy Pass. But as we round up the central Alaska range, Windy Pass and Isabel Pass should generally see MVFR conditions for Monday. Further east, Mentasta generally VFR, though the north entrance and up into the Tanana Valley there, MVFR conditions at least to start there Monday morning. Tanita Pass, generally MVFR conditions are expected during the day on Monday. Portage Pass, MVFR becoming VFR, but MVFR conditions may linger out along the east entrance into Prince William Sound. And then finally up there in the north end of the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White starting out with IFR conditions in the morning, giving way to MVFR. And looking at the freezing levels, as I've been saying, we don't have any big storms that are pulling in warmer air aloft out ahead of them. So we've seen an overall cool down. The mainland, we have surface freezing line now pushed off of along the YK deltas, Bristol Bay into the northern Alaska Peninsula, up along the northern Gulf Coast into the interior of the Panhandle. And the freezing levels aloft, 2,000 feet, are out over the Gulf up against the outer Panhandle, west-southwest coast, Sitka down toward Craig. And then we find out south of the Aleutian chain, 4,000 foot freezing levels aloft, but again, no really warm, moist air to speak of in the short term. But that'll be changing as a series of storms lift out of the North Pacific and bring a lot of moisture and windy conditions up into the Gulf here, starting Tuesday and then continuing pretty much into early November. Monday, there could be a few pockets, so we have a little thicker clouds, some patchy light snow, parts of the interior. Above 3,000 feet, there could be some isolated moderate icing. Also, any lingering light showers along the Gulf Coast, maybe above 4,000 or 5,000 feet there. And then behind me, there is a system further southwest of the Aleutians, but generally speaking, some isolated moderate icing above 4,000 feet. There'll be some brisker winds across the central Aleutians on Monday. And looking at the jet stream pattern over the mainland, relatively light winds. We do have an anticyclonically curved jet core coming into British Columbia, the Pacific Northwest of the lower 48 with 125 knot wind max out there in the North Pacific. Behind me, though, we do have 145 to 155 knot jet core coming down across the western central Aleutians into the northwest, into the North Pacific, and this is generally a northwesterly flow. At 9,000 feet, relatively quiet conditions across most of the mainland, especially in the interior, but here there's that we have a collection of weak lows out across the central, drifting into the southeast bearing on Monday afternoon, and there could be some locally stronger winds of 35 to 40 knots, but nothing really organized. Most of the wind field at mid-levels, 700 millibars, is going to be south of the Aleutians, where we could find winds in excess of 50 knots. And as we bring it down to 3,000 feet, out over the Bering, there are some pockets of 30 to isolated 35 to 40 knot winds, but nothing too terribly organized. Nevertheless, there'll be some breezier conditions here across the central Aleutians on Monday. And notice here along the Gulf Coast Panhandle into much of the eastern half of the mainland, relatively light winds. So turbulence on Monday, the greatest threat is going to be out here across the Aleutians. You get from the eastern back through the central Aleutians. There may be some moderate turbulence, surface to 3,000 feet. And just as a forewarning here, Haida Gwaii up into at least the southern half of the Panhandle. Watch out for Tuesday into Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. Stronger winds associated with a compact, deeper low will be riding northward and impacting southeast Alaska, especially the southern half of the Panhandle, with some higher winds and heavier precipitation. So stay tuned to later forecast.